I've already put out 2 videos about the Roland TD-27 version 2 update since it was released, but neither of those videos were actually about the new features or whether or not it's even worth updating, so let's fix that. I do think that updating your TD-27 to version 2 is definitely worth it, but I do also think that it's been a little bit of a missed opportunity to add a few other quality of life upgrades. The first and most obvious change is that 10 new kit presets have been added, 3 of the most popular kit presets have been updated, and a bunch of new user samples have been added to the stock module. Roland didn't specify which kits were updated, but as far as I can tell, they are Kit 1, the Studio A kit, which is now called Deep Studio, Kit 2, the Solid kit, which is now called Solid and Low, and Kit 6, the Pop kit, which is now called Fat Pop and has been moved to kit number 12. Kits 3 to 11 and Kit 13 are all new kits, and then from 14 onwards they're all the same as the previous software version. So let's take a listen to the 3 updated kits back to back compared to the original versions. Yeah, they're all a bit nicer, I think. They're fundamentally very similar, but they've got more depth to them and a bit more punch. Some of the ambient settings have also seemingly changed. Now let's listen to the new kits. These are all pretty nice additions to the stock module. The majority of them are using the new user samples to pretty good effect. Admittedly, it's not as nice as getting a bunch of new full instruments like when the TD-50 upgraded to the 50X. These are all one-shot samples and they do have that Roland sound character, but overall there's a decent selection in there which blend in nicely with the other onboard sounds, and of course you can use them all for your own custom kits if you want. For example, here's a kit that I threw together using some of these new stock samples. One thing to note here though is that these samples mean that there's now less user sample memory for you to use for your own samples or for downloaded kits that come with samples such as the ones from my store. So if you have a lot of downloaded kits that contain samples, you might not be able to fit as many of them onto your module with the update. The simple solution to this is to delete some of the new samples if you don't think you'll use them, or to create multiple backups with different kits saved to each one and swap between them. You can always restore the new user samples by using the factory reset option and checking the reset with user samples box. My next favourite update is the addition of parallel compression and the mix balance function on the master compressor. Previously, you could either have the master compressor turned on or turned off. You could of course compress a little bit or a lot, but the whole kit would be affected by whatever level of compression that you used. Now, the mix balance function lets you mix the wet signal, which is the compressed sound, and the dry signal, which is the uncompressed sound, together. You can approach this in a number of ways. The classic parallel compression technique is to add very heavy compression, but only blend in a small amount of the wet compressed signal to the overall sound, giving the feeling of a lot of compression without completely squashing the sound. So that's what the new single parallel and two band parallel presets do. Or you could go the other way with it like I sometimes do, which is to use the kit compression as I normally would for a reasonably compressed sound, but then change the mix to allow about 10% of the dry signal back in. I find that this helps just give a little bit more natural liveliness back to a compressed sound. Or of course you can go anywhere in between. Another great addition is the fact that the transient settings can now be applied to user samples. I have a whole video about transients which explains what they do and how you can use them on your own kit, so go check that out after this, but previously these could only be applied to Roland's internal sound. Enabling transient controls on the user samples is great because it lets you shape the attack and release of a sample on the module and hear and feel the difference in real time, rather than having to edit the sample multiple times on a computer and hope for the best. It can also allow you to repurpose the same samples on multiple kits but in different or unique sounding ways. You can choose between 4 different type settings on the user samples, which is explained very poorly in the updated data list manual. From my own testing, it appears to control how quickly the release controls are applied after the attack. Type 1 has the attack and release applied very close together. Type 4 has the release controls being applied much later on. Experimenting with these settings and listening will be the best way to work out which to apply, but I especially think that different lengths of samples will probably work better with different type settings. Roland also added the attack type parameter that was added to the TD-50X module too. When this is set to normal, the attack setting is applied to the sound all of the time. If you choose wide 1 or wide 2, the attack setting will be applied more as you go up in dynamics. This is really handy for making one-shot samples feel more dynamic, since they now react to the velocity of your hits. The fade parameters for the sub-instruments have also been updated in line with the TD-50X module. You can now choose your own fade endpoint, which gives you a greater level of control over how quickly your sub-instrument will be at its loudest point. Previously, Fade 2 had a default endpoint of 127, and Fade 3 had a default endpoint of 127 plus 32, which only affected the digital pads, meaning that the sub-instrument would begin fading at the fade point, but it was only ever at its full volume at the top of your dynamic range. Now you can choose to have your sub-instrument hit its full volume at a lower velocity, which is another very useful feature for fine control of dynamics. This also means that Fade 3 was made redundant, so it was removed. A crossfade option was also added, which allows you to slowly swap between two sounds across the dynamic range, rather than just instantly swapping like the switch function does. You will see this crossfade function used quite a bit on the new stock kits that use the additional samples. Beyond this, the rest of the updates are quite minor. There's the addition of some new pad presets to support the new CY14RT and CY12CT thin cymbal pads, a TDZ button on the one kit load screen which lets you load Roland Cloud kits, and there's some additional information on some screens, like being able to see the sub-instrument that's assigned from the main instrument layer, and the sub-name of the kit being displayed on the one kit load and copy menu screens. So for the average home user that just likes to play, the changes that have been made improve the module's out-of-the-box experience. For more technical users, there are definitely some nice upgrades in there too. Overall, I think that's a win for a free upgrade. However, I do think that there was a small missed opportunity here to add in some other features from the TD-50X upgrade that could have improved things further. For example, a layer preview feature was added to the TD-50X that lets you listen listen to either the main instrument layer or the sub-instrument layer on its own. This wasn't added to the TD-27 version 2 update, and I do think that's a shame because it's an incredibly useful feature to have, especially if you want to hear exactly what the new transient controls are doing to the sound on the sub-instrument layer. You can listen to the main layer alone by turning off the sub-layer entirely, but you have no way of listening to the sub-layer alone. On the TD-50X, you have to hold down the shift button to activate this, and the TD-27 doesn't have a shift button, but there's a completely free spot right here where the fourth function button is that would have been perfect for this feature. Similarly, the TD-50X added a preview function to the ambience settings so that you could hear the ambience in solo. Again, this lets you hear exactly what the changes you make are doing. This would have been the perfect opportunity to add this since there are free buttons on these screens that could have been used. The TD-50X also added an import all option to the user sample import screen. You could use this to import an entire folder of user samples rather than doing them one by one, and that is a huge time saver. Again, I think it's a real shame that they didn't add this to the TD-27. One thing that I've always thought was quite lacking is the copy menu on the TD-27. On the TD-50X, you can copy across lots of individual settings from one kit to another, such as the ambience settings, the multi-effect settings, groups of instruments such as all of the toms or all of the cymbals, and you can even copy trigger banks for situations where you might swap between similar kits with only one or two pads changed. I didn't necessarily expect them to add these features to the TD-27 version 2 update, but it would have been a great opportunity to do so, and would have greatly increased the flexibility of the module with very little effort. Speaking of the copy menu, despite its limitations, there are still plenty of things that you can do with it that a lot of people don't seem to know about. Features like being able to copy kits directly out of backups without loading the entire backup, or restoring the stock kits without doing a factory reset. If you want to know more about the copy menu, check out this video right here. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers!